And in verse 32, he said, "And what shall I say more? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon." And he mentioned 6 people here, but we want to look at the judge Gideon that is in the Old Testament that Paul mentions here. And certainly he's a very interesting character and one that is unique, just to say the least. But we first find Gideon in the 6th chapter of the book of Judges, Judges chapter 6. And if you read chapter 6 and 7, you'll find out a great deal about this individual who was a judge in Israel. And we'll see the context here that caused Paul to mention him and his faith in God. Now, he's not quite as well known probably as Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, and Moses, and those that we have studied. But it says in the 6th chapter, "And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian 7 years. And the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel, and because of the Midianites the children of Israel made them the dens which are in the mountains, and caves, and strongholds. And so it was, when Israel had sown, that the Midianites came up, and the Amalekites, and the children of the east, even they came up against them, and they encamped against them, and destroyed the increase of the earth, till thou come unto Gaza, and left no substance for Israel, neither sheep, nor ox, nor ass. For they came up with their cattle and their tents, and they came as grasshoppers for multitude, for both they and their camels were without number, and they entered into the land to destroy it. And Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites, and the children of Israel cried unto the Lord." Now, when we think about the Israelites and what God had proven to them, and surely the message had been passed on to their children and to generations, but you would think that they would continue in the work of God after that they had heard about all the miracles that God had done down in Egypt and the crossing of the Red Sea, sustaining them in the wilderness for 40 years, that their clothing and their shoes did not wear out, that their food was given to them every morning, and they received manna or bread from heaven, and they received quail there in the wilderness for all that time. And the Lord had blessed Israel, brought them into the land. They had partially conquered it, and I think that was the beginning of their downfall, when they did not begin to completely conquer the land, as you'll find in the book of Joshua. Now, we come to the period here of the Judges, and notice in the opening statement, "And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord." Now, the Lord may let things go on a while, but eventually judgment's coming. That's a very, very fact. "And the Lord delivered them into the hands of Midian 7 years." Now, this is one of the times that they were in the servitude of foreigners because of this. And we find Gideon here, as they are hid, that they are in places that God didn't mean for them to dwell. He said that they would be the first in the land, they would lend to other people, they would be the greatest nation of the world. And notice in verse 2 the plight of these Israelites. "And the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel," or they were conquered, And because of the Midianites, the children of Israel made them the dens which are in the mountains and caves and strongholds. Now, that God didn't intend for Israel to live in a cave. He intended for them to have well-built houses in the new land that was flowing with milk and honey. He didn't intend for them to be conquered. He gave them everything, and it was a very gracious land that Joshua said was literally flowing with milk and honey. It was a metropolis compared to the things that they had endured in the wilderness that 40 years and what they had come from down in Egypt. Now, when Gideon is called by the Lord, that an angel visits him, and Gideon is, I'm not going to say he's a coward, because the Lord didn't say that. But he was like the rest of the Israelites. He was in hiding. We find in one place where him and his father was hiding behind the winepress, threshing wheat, in hiding from the Midianites so they wouldn't steal what little they had left, because they had already come and taken all their animals and all their crops, and we read they were greatly impoverished. In fact, they were at the verge of starvation at this point. And the Lord calls Gideon, and he calls him a man of valor. He didn't call him a coward because he was hiding, but he was a man of valor. And Gideon questioned that. And so, as the story goes on through these two chapters, that the Lord speaks to Gideon, and he tells him that he's going to have him lead a charge against the Midianites, or he's going to wage war against these oppressors, and that they were to go and cut down the grove of Baal. Now, when you're being oppressed by a bunch of Baal worshipers, and you're instructed to go cut down the place of worship, he said you go and you cut down the grove or the timber where they worship, and on that rock you build an altar unto the Lord. And you take your father's young bullock and the other that's 7 years old, and you take the wood that you chop down, and you burn a sacrifice unto the God of Israel. Well, they didn't question. They could have said, well, now, if God is so great, why are we in this distress? Why is all this? Where's all the miracles that our fathers told us of? Well, obviously he had stopped them because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. But now, the Lord tells Gideon how to get out of this. And he said, you build this ark and you make this sacrifice. And then he said, we're going to wage war against the Midianites. Well, Gideon at night, he went out and he chopped down the timber. He built the altar and he made the sacrifice. And he's visited by an angel of the Lord, which we're told in this chapter that a prophet of the Lord came. And Gideon made him a meal. He prepared a kid and some cakes of meal, and he brought it out. And the prophet said, place it on the altar. You put the meat up there from the kid, and you pour the broth on it. And he took the staff that was in his hand, and he touched it, and a flame came up and devoured it. And Gideon said, of a certainty, I have been visited by a prophet. Now, he told him that he was going to war, and Gideon said, well, I'm going to require a sign of you. He said, I'm going to fold a fleece of wool, I suppose, and he said, if it's wet in the morning with dew, and the ground is dry all around, I'll know that you're a prophet. So the next morning he rises and he squeezes the fleece, and a whole bowl of water comes out of it, and the ground is dry. So Gideon, a little bit suspicious still, he said, well, we'll try this one more time. He said, let's do this one more night. And he said, I'll fold the fleece, and in the morning, if it's dry and the ground is wet all around, then I'll be satisfied. And lo and behold, in the morning the fleece was dry and the ground was wet all around. So Gideon calls for an army. And 32,000 people show up, men of war. Well, the Lord's not going to let Gideon have this victory on his own. You see, it's going to be the Lord's victory. And so he challenges Gideon, and he said, you go out there and you tell all those soldiers, all that are afraid, all of you that don't want to fight, you just go on back home. You know, 22,000 of them just packed up their stuff and left. They showed what they were, and it only left 12,000 or 10,000. And so the Lord tells Gideon, he said, you know, he said, you can't have this battle with this many men. He said, you take them all down to the brook, and he said, I'm going to perform another test. And he said, all the men that just fall down on their knees and they just begin to drink out of the stream, you number them. And he said, you watch. And he said, you look for those that dip water with their hands and laps it like a dog. And he said, those you can take to war. And he ended up, he only had 300 left. Now here's an army that started out with 32,000, and now Gideon is down to 300 soldiers. You know, you see, the Lord said, Gideon, you'll take credit for this battle if you have all these. But he said, I'm the one giving the battle. I'm just using you to accomplish my purpose, was what it really amounted to. And so Gideon told these others to go on back home. And so the Lord gave him a battle plan with 300 men. They were to put a lamp in a pitcher, and he divided them into 3 groups. And he followed the directions of the Lord to win against the Midianites. Now, when we think about the fact that Gideon followed these instructions, and that he was not a man of self-proclaimed valor, as the Lord called him, a man of valor, but he did follow the Lord's instructions, and no doubt, his faith grew as the prophet told him that the victory is the Lord's. He's going to give it to you. He's going to use you to obtain this victory. Well, through Gideon's obedience to God, he makes the roll call of the faithful here in the 11th chapter of the book of Hebrews. And they followed the Lord's plan, and they break the pitchers, and each soldier held the light, and they were a multitude of people. And the Lord caused them to flee. And if you read on through the 7th chapter, you'll find where there was something like 120,000 that were killed by these 300. And then they pursued them on further. You see, God used Gideon. And you say, well, why didn't he just take all these 32,000, and he would have felt a lot safer if he would gone out and just done what he could do with those, I'm confident if he had of, he would have lost the battle for the Israelites. You see, doing things God's way, under God's instruction, is very, very important. Now, let's learn an object lesson from the book of 2 Samuel, where they are transporting the ark of God. 2 Samuel chapter 6. Now, when they came into the land of Israel, or the land of Palestine or Canaan, from Egypt, and they brought the ark, and then they thought one day, we'll take this ark into battle, and it'll give us a lot of power. Well, the ark wasn't supposed to be taken into battle, and it was captured by the enemy, and they put it in the house of Dagon, a false god, and when they did, the statue of Dagon fell and was broken, if you remember. And later on, the enemy decided, this is harmful to us, we're going to give it back to Israel, and so they sent for King David to come and get it. Now remember, how was the ark supposed to be carried or moved? There were supposed to be some rods run through it, and 4 men was to carry it, one on each corner. Well, it was a long distance, and so they decided to make it convenient for themselves. You see, the world today, we're hooked on convenience, aren't we? We even have stores called convenience stores. We have convenient banking where you can do it by your telephone and all, if you know how. But anyway, all these things, we're just spoilt to convenience today. Well, this is nothing new, and so let's look. 2 Samuel 6:1, David gathered together all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000, and David arose and went up with all the people that were with him from Baal of Judah to bring up from thence the ark of God, whose name is called by the name of the Lord of hosts that dwelleth between the cherubims. And they set the ark of God upon a new cart, and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, and was in Gibeath, and Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drave the new cart. And they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was at Gibeath, accompanying the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. And David and all the house of Israel played before the Lord on all manner of instruments made of fir wood, even of harps, and on psalteries, and of timbrels, and on cornets, and on cymbals. And now we've got quite a parade going on here. Now, you say, well, boy, this is fantastic. David's out there leading, and all these people are playing on these instruments. And they didn't just bring an old wagon to haul it on. They fashioned a brand new cart to haul this on. And everything is in style. And when they came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah put forth his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it, or the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God smote him there for his error, and there he died by the ark of God. Now, they're doing all this wrong. And all this parade and splendor and all this good music, and David is leading, and this is really stylish. It would have been a grand parade until that oxen stumbled and the ark began to fall over, and old Uzzah goes up there and he touches it to stabilize it so it don't fall, and lo and behold, he's instantly dead. Why? Because they failed to follow the instruction of the Lord. You go back in the books of Moses, and it tells you exactly how it's to be moved, and this is an incorrect method. Now, you ask yourself, and you answer honestly, is it important to do the work of God in the right way? Now, there's a multitude of people today in churches or assemblies in the name of Jesus Christ, and they will go after the philosophy that, well, the end justifies the means. Well, does it? Say, well, we figured out a new way, mainly humanism. Brother Tracy was right on this morning, in speaking about the Talmud and these traditions and laws that the rabbis had come up with and added to the law of Moses. Somewhere in the back of my mind, and I might be wrong, but I was thinking about it this morning, I think they had added about 3,000 of those. I know it was a huge number. And one that he didn't mention that come to mind was that you couldn't kill a flea on the Sabbath. That's getting picky. Well, a lot of people today are adding to what we have in the New Testament instructions for the New Testament church. You say, well, do we have to have a large number to be correct and do what the Lord wants us to do? Or can we accomplish something with a small amount? Well, now, here's old Gideon, and he's got these 32,000. He said, all you that's afraid, go home. And here they took off. And he ends up with 300. Just a small group. Can he win a battle? Well, strategically looking at it from man's point of view, he was probably about to fail. But now the prophet had already told him. And God had called him and told him to follow his instructions. And he had followed them. I don't think Gideon expected to end up with 300 men when he saw that mighty army show up to begin with. You say, well, if he'd have took those, Gideon had said, boy, I led you into a great battle, and here we are. That's what a lot of men are doing today. They're taking credit for the work of God. God is more important than any one of us. Now, when we dismissed this morning, and as I stood at the door, and I made an observation that really made me rejoice. I didn't say a word, but I in heart rejoiced. And it goes somewhat along with what we're studying right here this evening. And my observation is, over the last about 6 weeks, we've had excellent attendance. Maybe it'll continue for the next 6 months or even longer. Maybe it'll increase. But I noticed that we have people the age of Ella Grace, Luke, and then just start stepping right on up. We have a wonderful mixture, young people, teenagers, those that are old enough that marriage may be even trickling around in their brain. Who knows? Maybe not. But anyway, then we have young couples that are guiding children in the right direction. And then we have middle-aged of old people like me. And then we have what we call a few senior citizens. In other words, what I'm describing is, in my mind, about the perfect mixture for good fellowship and one of the Lord's churches. I hear pastors talk about, small churches out in the country, and they'll say, well, we're down to about 15 elderly folks. Well, if that being the case, what's going to happen in a few years? Well, you can answer that. And you hear about churches that are even less people meeting. And you say, well, can we do the work of God with what we have? Yes. We can do wonderful things. It doesn't take 32,000 to do the will of God. Jesus came from heaven, and he chose 12 men that the religious world of the day would have condemned. They might have kept the Apostle Paul because he was well educated. He had sat at the feet of Gamaliel there in Jerusalem, and he was well versed in the law of Moses, and he was probably the smartest man of his day. That they might have hung on to him. But they had this old publican and these fishermen and just roughshod guys. And it said that Jesus took 12 ordinary men and he changed the world forever. He did. And he introduced the church, the administrative body, into the world that we can be a part of. Well, he didn't start with a lot. The church at Jerusalem, if you read in the book of Acts, there was only 120 names there on the day of Pentecost. And then they began to grow, and what did the Lord do? He scattered them all over the world. They've done wonderful things. Yes, we can do great things with what we have. We have a wonderful opportunity. Just like Gideon, with 300 people, he brought Israel out from under bondage, defeated the Midianites, and why? Because he did what the Lord told him to do. He went from a man who was hiding in a cave and then hiding behind a threshing floor, threshing a little grain that he might just survive, to a great man of valor. That's what the Lord said he was. Thou great man of valor. You see, well, can we do more than we've done in the past? Are we capable? Very much so. If we just maintain the faith that was given, and we just keep it and contend for the faith once delivered unto the saints.